So the next question says, a case in which individually rational behavior leads to a jointly inefficient outcome is known as which of the following? And so this is going to go into a little bit of game theory. And game theory is an interesting setup with most well known through the Nash equilibrium or prisoner's dilemma experiment. And so, well, not really an experiment, more like a theoretical problem. And so if for those of you who aren't familiar, we can go over a little bit of basis for prisoner's dilemma in game theory here. Prisoner's dilemma. When we can look at the payoff matrix, it kind of best explains the prisoner's dilemma problem. And so with prisoner's dilemma, we're going to set up this theoretical problem where two people commit a crime and they are both caught and both are held separately and interrogated. And so we have person A as the first person and person B as the second person. And so we have these two prisoners, and they're faced each individually with two choices. They can either cooperate with the police, or they can defect or betray their partner, right? And kind of, put their partner, throw the partner under the bus, essentially. And so these decisions are completely independent of the other person's decision because these two people are kept isolated. And so you have no idea what the other person is going to do, and you're faced with these two choices. Now for person A, if they choose to cooperate, or actually for either of them, if they both choose to cooperate, then they both serve 1 year in jail. On the other hand, if A chooses to cooperate and B betrays A, then A is going to serve 3 years for cooperating, and B is going to go free because he defected on person A. Meanwhile, you can flip it and say, well, if A decides to betray B and B stays silent and cooperates, then A goes free and B serves 3 years, which is more than a 1 year they would both serve if they cooperated. And finally, if they both decide to betray each other independently, then they both serve 2 years. And so this is the prisoner's dilemma setup. And the numbers don't have to be these numbers. They can be a little bit different, but the same idea will always apply. And the idea is that the optimal solution, if they were able to communicate, would be for both of them to cooperate, and then they would both serve 1 year, right? And so, oh, sorry. Is this the right numbers? Yeah, so if the ideal situation for either of them is going to look at the Nash equilibrium for what is going to happen with prisoner's dilemma, right? Looking at option A, given that you do not know whether or not the person B is going to cooperate or defect, person A can look at assuming that person B cooperates, what is the optimal choice for person A? The person A's optimal choice is obviously to cooperate, and in that sense, if B were to cooperate, in that sense, if B were to cooperate, person A's optimal choice is to defect because A would be able to go free and B would serve the time, but A would get to leave immediately. Now, assuming that person B is going to defect no matter what, then the choice between whether the choice between whether person A defects or cooperates is pretty easy for A as well. Assuming that person B is going to betray person A, then A's best bet is still to betray person B because in that sense, A would serve 2 years instead of 3 years. And so we can see no matter what happens, right, whether B is going to cooperate or B is going to defect, A's dominant strategy, choice that would make the most sense for A, is going to be this bottom row here, where A is always going to choose to defect B no matter what. Sorry about that. You can see that if we flip that for B, it's the same as well. If we assume A is going to cooperate, then B's incentives is to defect because he would rather go free than serve 1 year. And if A was going to defect, then B's incentive is still to defect because he would rather serve 2 years than 3 years. And so both people end up with this situation where they're both incentivized to defect, and they end up in this last quadrant where they both serve 2 years. That is individually rational behavior, right? A is not communicating with B in any way, and B is not communicating with A in any way, and they both end up in this Nash equilibrium outcome with both serving 2 years. That individual rational behavior, however, leads to a jointly inefficient outcome because this is not the best outcome for both people. The best outcome is for them to both serve 1 year, not 2 years. And that's the prisoner's dilemma, the fact that this individual rational behavior results in a Nash equilibrium, which is less than optimal. And kind of one of the fundamental, contact or fundamental examples of game theory. So that's going to be the kind of explanation or understanding for prisoner's dilemma or game theory or Nash equilibrium. Let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. So the previous tutor said prisoner's dilemma. Prisoner's dilemma is a game in game theory that shows why two rational individuals will fail to cooperate even when it appears that it's in their best interest to do so. These models self-interested actions displays how two rational individuals will pursue their respective interests which occur in betraying each other, even though cooperation leads to optimally efficient outcomes for both the individuals. The fact that betraying rewards oneself and punishes the other induces individuals to betray each other to seek the reward. However, when the action is carried out collectively, the individual ends up in a jointly inefficient outcome. So I want to clarify that it's not that betraying rewards oneself and punishes the other. Necessarily, like that's true because they have both adopted strategies to defect, but the reason for this is a pretty rational. Yeah, I mean, okay, I think that's an okay way to put it. Just making sure that's a rational, that we understand it's a rational way of looking at things. It's not something that's motivated by, any like emotion or psychological like induction or anything like that. So yeah, I think this is a good answer though. So nothing wrong with that. And we can mark that as correct and move on to the next question.